Fatal Frame is a Japanese third-person horror game and follows Miku as she searches the Homura mansion looking for her missing brother.
What is this place?
Atmosphere. Fatal Frame does a masterful job of building suspense and tension whilst you explore the house. From the deeply haunting soundtrack, the diary entries that paint harrowing images of the horrific events that happened in the mansion, and why the ghosts are still lingering and what they ultimately died from. The story and its unsettling tales of the dark rituals that took place in the mansion leave a feeling of death and decay that seems to hang in the air as you explore the place, and being confronted by victims in the form of ghosts is another constant reminder of what happened there. Another layer of tension is in the realization that ghosts can spawn in randomly and you can get attacked at any point, which gets more aggressive as the nights go on. The general appearance of the mansion is also just very strange and foreboding. Its dark, washed-out colours paint a house without life, its dusty relics seem unwelcoming, and every so often the floor is broken or bloodstains are barely visible on the walls. The cutscenes that play are done so well that it's almost nail-biting to see Miku do something as simple as opening a cupboard door, and it subverts expectations every now and then to keep the player guessing. Fatal Frame layers it on very thick, and its combination of sound design, dark spooky corridors and backstory give the game that feeling of sadness and death. That's one Harry Mason. Scares. The core gameplay involves using the camera to exorcise ghosts, and it's one of the most effective mechanics in any horror game I've ever played. You feel at a real disadvantage to the ghost being stuck in the physical plane as they travel freely in and out of the walls or sneak up behind you. They move very fast, adjusting speed and disappearing, and it makes the combat almost frantic as you try to take a shot at the ghost before it disappears or attacks you. The game rewards players for waiting until the last moment to take the shot by inflicting more damage, but missing a shot puts dread into you as you have to wait for the camera to reload, leaving you defenseless in the meantime. On very rare occasions, a ghost will vanish, the game will cut the soundtrack completely, and leave you in an eerie silence that's deafening as you wait for the ghost to reappear. The combat is sprung onto players suddenly and sometimes randomly, with ghosts that spawn if you hang around in an area for too long or if you go into the wrong part of the house, leaving you in a constant state of being unprepared. Their general appearance is pretty conventional for the most part, but some of them have strange bodily proportions or things that stand out like a broken neck or a deformed face that's just unsettling to look at. But there's sillier ones like the one that's just a floating head that didn't really inflict any fear at all. The cutscenes are both incredibly creepy and straight up nightmarish, with moments like the blinding ritual being hard to stomach, and the bewildering power of ghosts is usually displayed in these, but disappointingly, most of these unique powers are never there during the gameplay.
What's that?
There's a lot of scripted events that take place, like things falling over, random sound effects playing and candles sparking to just catch you off guard, but ultimately it's the camera that delivers the most frightening moments. Even just using the viewfinder to search for hidden ghosts is nerve-wracking, and the combat itself is the selling point of the game, making the player feel so helpless and outmaneuvered by things they can't always see. That's 2 Harry Masons. Sound design. Fatal Frame uses everything from metallic swelling drones to spooky jangling metal and deep, dark ambient rhythms and rumbles to give parts of the house different feelings from despair to foreboding, and its quietest pieces radiate old 60s horror films and are usually its creepiest tracks. There's some really disturbing ghostly voices singing in unison, like an impossible choir that effortlessly bend pitches up and down the scale to give you the creeps, and it all melds together with woeful sounding 90s string sections, like the soundtrack of the X-Files. The overall soundtrack is very varied, and it often seems to get more menacing the deeper you're into the house you go, but sometimes it repeats the same piece over and over for some reason, which is just a real shame. When you're near a hidden ghost, there's the sound of frantic chattering that's so distorted it's almost like the gnashing of teeth, and when you hover the camera over a special object, there's the sound of something like a demonic gong echoing constantly. It all sounds so spiritual, but dark and strange. When the ghosts attack, the soundtrack turns into a dirge with everything from what sounds like garbled radio chatter, shrieking of various pitches, sped up and down voices, and the thud of a heartbeat that doesn't inflict panic as much as the feeling of doom. The sound effects are of a similar caliber, and to date, this game has my favourite sound effects for the camera charging its spirit power. The sounds of doors opening always feel dense and foreboding somehow, and there's a lot of reverb on everything that gives the game a sense of spaciousness that's executed well throughout all of the areas in the game. It uses directional audio to help you find the ghost, which is really helpful, and yet another reason to play with headphones. The biggest downfall may be the English voice acting, and whilst it uses a lot of effects like vinyl crackling and distortion, most of the actual dialogue is very wooden and certain characters are almost monotone, which whilst it never really broke or damaged the immersion for me, may leave others wanting more. Despite that though, Fatal Frame's soundtrack and effects are pretty iconic and stand out in the genre easily. That's 3 Harry Masons. Gore. Whilst there's never really any gore on the screen, with most of the cutscenes cutting away at vital moments, there are blood splatters and trails on the walls alluding to past incidents. When you pause the game and leave it, it of course does the bloody handprint screensaver-like animation that's vaguely disturbing, but really the game is about ghosts, and whilst there is some blood, it mostly makes sense that there isn't much left to see after the amount of time that has passed between the actual bloodshed and Miku's appearance on the scene. Sometimes I wonder if it would have been better to show exactly what happened during the blinding ritual, but sometimes things are better left to the imagination. That's 4 Harry Masons. Story. The story follows Miku as she tries to find out what happened to her brother Mafoyu, who entered the Humura mansion searching for the novelist Jinsei Takamine and his 2 assistants. The game is split into 3 nights and 3 stages, the first following the fate of the novelist, the second being the fate of the folklorist, and finally the Humura family and the rituals. As usual from a Fatal Frame game, the story is very dark, containing a lot of incredibly disturbing rituals and tragic backstories. The game delivers these past events with audio tapes and cutscenes, some diary entries, and sometimes the ghosts of the past will say a few cryptic words before disappearing. What I like is how it includes newspaper reports that are written like the supernatural deaths are the work of a murderer rather than vengeful spirits, and it's these various perspectives on the events that took place that makes a lot of the notes you find worth reading. Some of them aren't as good as others, with a few notes being a bit generic and cliche when talking about having a sixth sense and how all these events must be connected somehow, which is pretty obvious to the player, and doesn't really need to be said in my opinion. Depending on the difficulty of the game, you get different endings, but disappointingly, the harder game mode provides an ending that's inconsistent with the later games, making it irrelevant. For the first game in a franchise, Fatal Frame layered a lot of its disturbing story on thick and doesn't shy away from difficult topics or hard-to-stomach scenes, which is something the series did more as time went on, making the final score 5 out of 5 Harry Masons. Fatal Frame is the beginning of something special, and whilst this first installment may feel a bit dated to others, and its voice acting and difficulty may turn a lot of players off, it's impressive to see how well they nailed it this first time. It's an incredible game that I go back to frequently. Again, I'd like to remind you this whole thing is down to my opinion in horror games. If you don't share this opinion, then that's cool, I get it. I'd like to point out that whilst I will never forget the blinding ritual, I did not scream like a banshee or run away from the computer. I advise you don't either. There will be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching. Let's go check out Bumps in the middle of the night. Peace.